And so designer might find it, get really excited, brings in their engineers, and then the whole company sort of comes in and says, this is like opened up a whole new way for us to build stuff really rapidly, stuff that we couldn't build before, and totally destroy timelines. Suddenly we're like, oh, we can actually ship our crazy end of year experience idea in just a matter of months.
All right, boys, very good to see you both at the beginning of 2026. So I first want to start by just kind of recapping 2025. And, you know, from the outside, it seemed like it was a very, very big year for Rive. There was like some really cool stuff that happened at the end of the year where a lot of companies kind of all doing the same thing. Turns out a lot of them were using Rive. So I'm curious if maybe you could just kind of reflect on like where you are right now in the Rive journey. Like what was 2025 for you guys and where do you feel like you are now?
Well, thanks for having us, Joey. Always awesome to be here. So I would say the big overarching theme was that we were really completing what Luigi and I have internally referred to, and we've maybe said it a few times publicly, but I don't know that we like made like a huge a public message about it, is that we've really been working on finishing our V1. Like someone on our Discord and on the community on the Rive site commented recently, like, why is this still 0.8 something? It's not even V1. And that was the first like kind of external noticing of that I've seen, and that's really because we haven't hit our V1. Luigi and I laid out almost 5 years ago now, actually just 5 years ago now, the whole feature set that we needed, and we've been working towards V1. And so we internally refer to the Rive team, the early team that joined and that's been working up until now on all the feature set, as the V1 team, and that really was what 2025 was about, was kind of getting to that compounding moment where all of the sort of V1 features have started coming together. There's still a few that we can get into that are wrapping up, but that was really one of the big things. And I mean, at the start of the year, we launched vector feathering, which was a huge thing that was missing, like the ability to create these kind of soft shadows and glows and basically blur effects on vector shapes. And we just held back for so long because we wanted that to be really performant. We didn't want to just ship a typical pixel blur effect.
Right.
So we kicked off the year with that. And then there was data binding, which was a huge thing that was necessary to be able to basically connect your data to your graphics and suddenly do way more than what was possible with state machine inputs. And that was all part of the overall vision of Rive, which was, always not so much just to be an animation tool, but to be a creative environment where designers, animators, and developers all collaborate to build a full-blown experience together. And that's what V1 is, and that's what I think you might have seen at the end of the year, some companies started shipping, and we're going to start seeing way more of that stuff, I think, this year.
Yeah. So I've always kind of had this thought about Rive, and as I was kind of like prepping for this interview, I came up with this idea. I want to run it by you guys and have you respond. It's hard to build any kind of business, especially like a software business, but then there's certain types that are even harder, right? And so a two-sided marketplace is like typically hard mode in business where you have buyers and sellers and you're trying to combine them. And I feel like Rive almost has a three-sided marketplace because you've got designers, animators, then you've got the developers, but then on top of that, there may be, and maybe you disagree with my framing, but there's like this extra layer of like, well, now you need companies to like adopt the whole thing, and they need developers and artists, like depending on their use cases, right? And so it seems like from the outside, another thing you guys have been doing really well is you've been sort of like bouncing between like vector feathering was really for designers. Data binding was really for developers, right? And you've launched scripting, which we'll get into, which is also, I guess, for developers, but it also opens up a lot of options for designers. But so I'm curious, like, how do you just approach kind of like trying to get adoption across all three of those channels, right? Including the companies that in the end have to like sign up for a bunch of licenses.
Yeah. So I think I agree with everything you said. I would just maybe push back on the framing of like, because we actually do have a marketplace that is currently only has a bunch of free stuff, but there's a plan to do a lot more with it. Obviously, it's called a marketplace.
Yeah.
But like what you're describing, I think, is more selling SaaS software with a very broad number of personas.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Yeah.
More broad than your typical like tool that like is really targeting just one type of user or just a couple types of user. We really have a like you said, kind of the designer has to adopt it, the engineer has to adopt it, and the motion team has to adopt it, and then like the company has to actually buy it.
Right. The CTO may have to say, yes, okay, we'll do this, right?
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, you're totally right. That has been a big challenge of the tool. That it's not it's challenging, and it's also like there isn't quite a playbook for that that is as clean as going after just one type of persona.
Right.
But in many ways that echoes our founder journey and who we are. Like we are literally building the product for people like me and Luigi, who are a designer and developer who work together. And like we kind of always say, like that a creative individual who doesn't want to just stop at the design side or the engineering side or the motion side. And I I guess this is as good a moment as any to bring up the Flash comparison, because I think that's how we grew up, and that was something that we noticed a lot, was that like you'd come into Flash with one sort of background and you'd quickly evolve into realizing like, oh, I need to learn a little bit of code, I need to learn a little bit of animation. And I think that's what a tool like that really helps you do, is have the ability to do design, development, and motion all in one tool. It just it opens up so much more creative possibility.
Yeah, one of the things I was gonna say is just that we're not.
Yeah.
I don't see us. It's not so hard to sell to all these different people because they really want a tool that does this. I think most people, it clicks pretty quick. Maybe there's some people that are a little bit more into just the coding aspect of it, or there's a lot of tools that are trying to do the design and code directly. But most people, most developers, most engineers, most designers who have had to work on a project where they needed to hand things off and work in the way that we've worked in the last 15 years realize that this is just such a better way to do it. So I think normally we don't have to sell too hard. We normally get people get it pretty quick, and I think that has been the entire scope of what V1 encompasses, is getting people to be able to do that exact process all together.
So there's multiple paths, but a typical story is like, designer finds a tool, especially with where we've been up until now. Like I would say right up until data binding, what you said, Joey. It really has been primarily a designer the editor has been primarily a design tool. And so designer might find it, get really excited, brings in their engineers, and usually through a self-serve motion, through like very little support on our side, they realize that, oh, this like eliminates a lot of friction, and then the whole company sort of comes in and says, this is like opened up a whole new way for us to build stuff really rapidly, stuff that we couldn't build before, and totally destroy timelines that normally would take us forever to do. Suddenly we're like, oh, we can actually ship our crazy end of year experience idea in just a matter of months, instead of having to do a year of prep, code freeze for 6 months, conversion into code across multiple platforms and all that. And so yeah, that's been the story up until then. And then I would say it started to shift now, where it's been a lot of engineers coming in and saying like, actually, Duolingo, the CTO was part of the team that first discovered it and said like, oh, we got to use this. So even earlier on, it's been a little bit of a mix, but that's what I think makes it great, is that sort of bottoms up adoption can come from both sides. It can come from either the engineering side or the design side. And then they just got to get the two together, and the company makes a decision.
Yeah, Luigi, something you said, it just made me realize that I think my brain was kind of living in the post-Flash era. Most of my career was spent like after Flash kind of went away. And so I've always lived in this world where it's like design and development are two separate things, right? And Guido, you just kind of pointed out what the downstream effects of that. Things take 6 months to a year or more, and they're super complicated. Rive does solve that problem. I think my brain part of it is still like, oh yeah, but like they're still separate, so you have to kind of treat them separately. But you forget in the heyday of Flash, it wasn't separate. You had plenty of designer animators getting in and coding, and vice versa. So before we get into like the actual like new features and some of the things that are coming, I'm curious. So you've got like obviously the school motion audience like has heard about Rive like constantly for the past few years. I see a lot of developers on social media talking about Rive. And, and then there's like some very high profile projects that have come out. Like Spotify has talked about how their end of the year wrapped feature, which I love and I would look forward to it every year, was done in Rive this year. And I'm curious, we work with a lot of businesses for training. And, like you can have agencies where maybe there's 3 to 5 After Effects artists, and that's how many licenses of After Effects they have, and they're kind of doing all the work. Rive is kind of a totally different beast. So like how big are the teams now that you're seeing out there using Rive? Like how many people are actually using it, as much as you could say.
Yeah, so I think this might come as a surprise to some, as well, especially maybe the like School of Motion audience. It's actually the primary user of Rive is not, or maybe primary is the wrong word, but the majority of users at a company, yeah, user at Rive is actually anyone involved in the product building process. It's not just motion designers. I think motion designers really make it shine and add that extra level of polish that you see at Duolingo and Spotify and the LinkedIn Wrapped or at LinkedIn end of year in review that launched. You sort of in those cases, yeah, it's the motion designer that really adds that that level of just wow, this looks like something that you just couldn't do with typical Swift or
Mm-hmm.
HTML or anything like that. But yeah, like we can't share specific numbers, but the teams are very large. There's some of our biggest enterprise customers are hundreds of
Oh
seats,
wow.
and they tend to be people that are involved in the design process, in the management process, in engineering. In fact, I would say that the motion design, people who only have dedicated motion designers, because there are creative technologists at these companies that kind of ride the line between both. And that's what we're seeing a lot more of. And then we should probably talk about and what I would tell the School of Motion audience is where I would be going if I were you. But in general, like people who kind of stay a little bit more siloed, yeah, it's the motion designers are kind of a smaller part of that team. It's more all the design, engineering, and management teams that are part of those workspaces that work together on Rive as the product. It's a product
Mm-hmm.
team. That's the right way to say it. Rive isn't so much just a motion team or a motion platform. It's a product platform. Um,
Yeah.
and so some of those examples that you made, yeah, those are hundreds of people working together to build those experiences.
Yeah, it's funny. I used to say this. I mean, this was years before I'd ever heard of Rive. But it was right when, I think it was probably right when Lottie came out. Like it was, I sort of had this realization that, we're used to working, if you're a motion designer, you're used to working primarily in advertising. And so you get advertising budgets. But the second you move over to product, you get product budgets. And those are very, very different. Those can be a lot bigger because that's not like a 3-month project, right? That's an ongoing major expense for a lot of companies.
Sorry, just to add to that real quick, it's also that like, and we've seen this shift. Like, it actually started that way before we had data binding and even the more sophisticated state machine stuff that has come out over the years. It was more that people were adopting Rive for like these projects, and now it's a lot more. Oh, it's for the
Yeah.
product where it's an ongoing thing. It's not just like a one-time sort of thing that we're
That's
building.
awesome. That's
Anyway,
awesome. I'm sure your
yeah.
investors are very happy too. So let's talk about before we get into like the actual features. I just kind of want to recap and Luigi, this might be a good thing for you to kind of chime in on. So, we have 2 Rive courses. And both of them were launched. I think the second one came out right as you announced data binding. And those sort of lead right into data binding. So our next course, I may have identified the instructor. That'll cover data binding. We'll get into scripting eventually and all the more advanced stuff. But in the first Rive course, the thing that took me the longest time to figure out how to teach and the thing that seems to like trip students up the most when they're learning it is just the mental model of how the thing works because they're used to timelines. Artboards aren't that crazy of a concept. Keyframes and all of that. But then, in the earlier version of Rive, you had inputs, but you have conditions and you have events. And it just takes someone who's used to After Effects a little while to figure out how that loop kind of works and how things talk to each other. And now you've introduced data binding, which isn't that dissimilar from the inputs, kind of system that you had, but it's more complicated because now you've got converters and other things. And now you've added scripting, which can obviously lead to like a lot of complexity. So I'm curious, how do you see the mental model of Rive? Like, how would you explain it to someone that maybe just our audience, they understand the animation part and the design part. It's all the interaction stuff. Like, how do these things actually talk to each other?
Yeah, that's actually a really big challenge. And I think that the best thing for someone to realize is just how much power you get with making these divisions, these separations from design to the data for that design. A lot of times when a designer is working on mocking something up or a design for something, they are inherently working with data, but they're maybe not realizing it. They're putting in names and images, avatars, they're putting in prices, they're putting in things into their design that is fundamentally part of the data. And what Rive does is it just makes it more intentional to immediately start building with the concept of that data from the start and empowering a designer to be aware of it. They're doing it anyway. You're doing it anyway for all this kind of stuff. It's just that if I need this to dynamically go from, it's not even about interaction. If I need to interrupt an animation halfway through to be able to quickly complete in another state, how do I do that? How do I think about it? You're probably thinking about that as a motion artist, but you're just deciding, I'm going to block it, I'm going to stop it at 50%. But what if the tool lets you have the power to define where that is and tweak every iteration of it, make it different as it gets closer to 70% or 40% and so on. And so it is a shift in thinking, but I think it's one that pays off really, really in huge dividends. And we've seen it from teams like Duolingo has said what they've taken some massively complex files and rework them with data binding. And not only is it more performant, but the mental model for the people that were working on those files, thinking about, I need to build something that goes from this to this. So I'll mock this animation, I'll make that other animation. And no, now you've got data that will literally let it flow from that state to the next is just a huge reduction of mental load, making it much easier for you to then actually be successful at building what you're trying to build. It's just that no one's done this before. There hasn't been, Flash didn't have data binding built in. Flash didn't give you the ability to create data models, view models of what you're building and populate them with data at design time and see that difference immediately. And I think that's one big thing that maybe we didn't touch on so far is what Rive's fundamental mission, and it's something about how Guido and I have always worked together that I think has always been so critical to us being successful, has been that iterative loop. It's being able to quickly make mistakes and have those mistakes not be something that sink a ton of time. If you can make a quick mistake, you can make a quick correction too. And that's exactly what Rive does. It lets you have all that tooling to quickly explore things and go in the right direction. And I don't think the tooling isn't, supporting all these things as first-class citizens. And so data binding and everything that comes with it, like converters, because the data is there, but maybe it's not in the form you need it. I want to show this as a color, not a number. I want to say November, not 11. How do I do that? And that's exactly what a converter can help you do. And in doing so, though, we had to build in a very restricted set of converters because everything we add to Rive, the other big challenge of Rive is everything we add into it has not only a performance aspect, but also a size of the runtime. If we add every single runtime, every single converter that we've ever imagined we wanted to support, it would bloat the runtime heavily for most people who don't need those converters. So the answer there is that we need to dynamically bring portions of Rive that only they need. And in order to do that, we need something that's more free form with logic, like a VM, a scripting language. And that's why, again, we chose to bring that fully in-house. We want to have a solution that gives everyone full control of all the knobs and whistles and write their own converters and only have it impact their runtime weight of bringing the special converter that they really need to display, second hands animating a certain way and so on. So I think that Rive is always trying to balance all those things together. And I think what that sometimes means for people who haven't worked with a system like that before is that there is complexity, and it is a little scary at first because there's just new ways of doing things. But those new ways of doing things have huge payoffs in actually simplifying your life and letting you deploy something that's fully functional.
Yeah, I wanted to go back to that real quick because I think that's something that what you said is important when you're working with a big team. Like we're talking about these hundreds of seats of people. If you're sort of doing the old motion graphics way of like animating something and then, I'm going to make another key here or another state machine timeline to go to sort of stop it and make it do this other thing, like you're inherently building this like really complicated logic that is all visual and is all part of the animation system. But if you're and someone who comes in that's brand new, like the product team has a lot of people that might move from one product to another or one project to another, and suddenly a new person comes in and there's a lot that they need to learn from like how you did things. And whereas if it's just extracted to the data and the animation is actually relatively simple, it's a lot easier to learn how it works. And so I think that's a huge advantage of learning this. Yeah, there's this learning curve for you as a motion designer, but once you've done that, your file is actually a lot simpler and easier, not only for you but for other people to come in and work with and learn. Um, and then just what Luigi was saying about extending functionality, like to put it also in motion designers terms, like think about like all the stuff you get with After Effects, like wiggle and different plugins for different types of interpolation and all that. Like if we added in all that stuff that everyone wants, or particle systems, like there might be like a vehicle company that's like, we don't use any interpolation, or we only use easy ease for everything. We don't need these extra interpolators that you have here. And we've had that a lot. We've had companies that are like asking for us, like, can you strip out this and strip us, like, people who are like really like sensitive to the file size, especially if they're adding to an existing. They're not using Rive for the entire experience, but they're using it for bits and pieces. It's sort of like we got to fit within like some limit, because otherwise it triggers like a Wi-Fi download, and that means that people can't download the app over cellular. And so anyway, this scripting enables that. It enables you to add your functionality, add your what we were saying, converters or interpolators or particle systems, whatever you want, without, and then it only ships for you. You don't, not everyone else has that cost. But I think that those are maybe missing the bigger unlock of scripting, which those are great. I think those are great examples of like why scripting is really important. But to get maybe back to your original question too, why was it necessary to introduce scripting? It's more about being able to do a whole lot more in the editor and build a whole lot more. There's sort of a ceiling at a certain point with state machines and data binding that you can build as far as logic and interactivity and connecting to external data, which hasn't launched yet, but may be coming very soon. There's just like a ton of stuff that you just need scripting for if you're going to build a full-blown experience in the editor, and that's what our customers want. That's what we found. Without sharing specifics, Duolingo's talked about this publicly, but there are others. As they started building like their experiences with Rive, they're starting to realize like, we don't want to just build like the chess app in here. We don't want to just build a character and have it integrated into our Swift app. We want to have this power for the entire experience, and that's where we're headed. And the fact that the runtime is so lightweight means that you can still do both. You can still choose to use Rive as just a UI layer of your AAA game, or for your entire app. You have the flexibility because it's so lightweight.
When I found a pattern that really worked well, it was after Flash. It was during kind of the Silverlight WPF days. There was something called MVVM, and there's a lot of concepts of it in Rive. It's a different approach because the fundamental is there, that there's a view, which is what a designer's working on, that is the stuff that you see. It has animation, it has keyframes. It's not just a static view. It's a very dynamic, motion heavy view. But then there's kind of the data that supports that view. And that's kind of what your view models are. That's the data that literally ends up being like the text that goes in there, the colors in some cases, the images, the lists of items. That's very view specific data. It's your contract. That is your contract with engineering, what used to be the inputs on the state machine, which are now being replaced by everything being done with this data binding system, which is just a much more free-form way of having data for your view. And then there's this other part, which is, yes, the converters, which are necessary to help massage that data into the right form. And scripting was absolutely necessary for that. And it was the first kind of hook that got us towards wanting to do that. But we always knew that we needed the other big final part, which was populating that data. And that's the business rules of the application. That's actually talking to services, that's talking to making things up if it's a game, whatever it is. But that's actually running the business rules and logic of an application, and then filling that data. And that is something that the scripting engine can do. That's something that we had to pick a scripting engine that would very specifically allow us to also fill our view models with data that's coming from other places, massage that data, read it in from other sources. And that was one big requirement, and it's still part of that V1 feature set, which scripting moves us towards, but doesn't completely unblock yet. But that's really closing that full loop, and that's why it was necessary now.
Yeah, I want to ask you guys just some dumb questions, because I'm sort of like a fake developer. Like I can use no coding apps and stuff. A lot of the things you're saying, Luigi, they remind me of something I learned years ago. There was a minute. This was actually before School of Motion. I thought maybe I want to learn how to make iPhone apps because everyone was doing that, right? And I learned about this concept. I might get it wrong, but I think it was model view controller. This is sort of how the Objective C language worked. And I remember when I kind of wrapped my head around Rive, this was before data binding and before scripting, it felt like it kind of works that way already a little bit. But I think for motion designers, that's kind of a foreign concept, right? Like this isn't something that most motion designers are kind of used to thinking about. So I'm wondering, as you guys build this stuff out, do you have a way of talking about it when you're talking to designers so that, you're not using, like, even the term view model, I think is a little confusing until you understand what that means. Because when I hear view, I think, oh, well, that's the artboard. That's the thing I'm viewing. But that's not what a view model is.
That's just the view part. That's it's like we spend time training folks on that, like view model. Think of that as a single word.
That was a huge challenge. That was a huge challenge in deciding how to do this. And exactly what you're talking about is actually one of the, it is hard. And the reason why it's hard is because a lot of creative individuals, whether they're engineers or designers or motion graphics artists, have been told to stay in their lanes. And so you hear about a view model or an MVC and you don't have tooling for that. You don't have a tool that gives you first class access to design stuff and controllers for that. And that's where Rive wants to break those barriers and help you. But that's also why we're very cautious about picking verbiage that makes sense for the person that has, like, we could pick a new thing. We could have picked data or something but the problem is that then you alienate both camps, because then both people are confused, or all three people are confused. If instead you play towards the strength of each one and you let them hold the hand of the person that's stepping up to the role that they maybe haven't approached before, or haven't been exposed to before. And that's the thing about Rive, by the way, that it doesn't require you to do this. You can still work with three people that do those things very separately in the same tool together. It's just that if you need to go into that, or if you want to go into that role, we encourage it. We think that the most successful people will be the ones that can be creative across all of that whole spectrum. But that's not strictly necessary. It's just that we do put it in your face and it's there for you to try to use if you want to grow to it.
Yeah, we have customers that are very siloed in those roles, and others that have just creative technologists, and they're the ones that are operating across everything. But to add to what Luigi was saying, I think an important thing there is that we did get a lot of pushback from the community when, maybe not a lot, but there were some very vocal voices when data binding launched about, like, why would you pick these names? Like, give me something that I as a designer can understand, or give me something that Figma calls variables, right, or something else. And we wanted to instead of dumbing things down to make them simpler, we said, no, these are existing patterns in engineering. Like, a designer would be better to learn the correct words than us making up something new and trying to change. We're already changing a lot here.
And vice versa, of course. We don't want to change any of the concepts. Like, we want to make sure keyframes stay keyframes. And if an engineer is working with keyframes, they should be called keyframes and vertices and so on.
Well, and especially with AI now, and you can go and talk to an agent and have it explain a lot of these concepts to you. If these are things that have existed for a long time, there's all this data set that can help you learn on it. If we're inventing new things and just changing names, we're just confusing people. But I did want to touch quickly on what you asked about, how does a designer think about this, or a motion designer specifically that thinks about it? One quick way, then Luigi, correct me if I'm wrong here or say anything that maybe is oversimplified, but you can sort of think of it as you as a motion designer are kind of doing what you always did. You're animating, you're designing, you're still building that thing. Like scripting doesn't, it's not like Cursor or Lovable or Claude Code, where you're you have to prompt it to tell it to design this entire experience for me. You can, and it'll do that. But I don't think that's necessarily what a lot of designers want to do. Or maybe it's a cool starting point, but the power of Rive is that it gives you the ability to actually build the graphic exactly how you want it, animate it exactly how you want it, and then connect it to those data points which are driven from the scripting. So the scripting tells the data to change. So you're not telling the scripting, hey, build me a character in the middle of the screen and 100 different zombies. Like, no, you're designing the character. You're designing the zombie. You're rigging it the way you would with bones and setting up inverse kinematics. But then you're exposing that inverse kinematic, like the footprint, where the foot is going to be, to data binding, and then the scripting is controlling that point that you've exposed. And so suddenly, like, the script tells it, like, hey, I click right, move my character right. I click left, move the character left, and your animation does the right thing that the designer told it to. And because that's all extracted or abstracted, the designer can keep tweaking that rig. They can change it to work differently. They can add a tail, they can add whatever, and the script doesn't need to be modified. You don't have to tell the script to like go and like recreate that whole character. You still have all that power in your design tool. Now, if you want to do what you do with Cursor or with Lovable, and you just use the Rive agent to just build the entire thing in code, and you can. But even then, I think my hypothesis there that is that we're going to start seeing more of is that it's going to open up the door to people who aren't motion designers, who were maybe traditionally some of the first people that would come into Rive, to come in and have a PM just like sort of build an experience. Like, hey, build me this thing, and the agent can build up your animations, your state machines, your view models, and kind of validate, hey, this kind of works. And then be like, okay, look, I've got this functional game or this functional UI, and it's doing kind of everything I want, but it really doesn't have that polish that we want at our company. And now I bring in the creative technologists and the animators and tell them, okay, go in and actually make this look great. And so you have like this professional animation, motion graphics, and design tool on top of that ability to quickly sort of one shot an experience. And I think that's where, yeah, we're going to see a lot more people come in and build things, and then have the power of everything else on top.
Yeah, I want to just quickly kind of compare like the scripting feature in Rive and a couple of the other ones that motion designers may be familiar with. So After Effects is the obvious one. There's scripting built into After Effects, but it's very, very limited in what it can do. It can basically, you can kind of run it and it runs one time. And so it can like change things in the interface, or it can add layers, or it can mess with keyframes or whatever. It's not running continuously and calculating on the fly. And then the other one is ActionScript, which a lot of the older heads will probably be curious. How does this compare to what Flash was capable of doing? And I don't know if the scripting itself adds capabilities that Flash didn't have, or if it's more just the structure of Rive. There's data binding, so you have live data input, stuff like that. But I'm wondering, how is Rive scripting different from those two?
Yeah, the main thing compared to After Effects is that it's definitely meant for runtime. So it's super lightweight. It comes with it gets, the bytecode that you write, the code that you write gets compiled to bytecode. It gets shipped into your RIV file. And then the runtime knows how to consume that and play it back and make it performant, make sure it's safe, all that kind of stuff, the sandboxing, access time, and that's all very, very similar. The difference is that we have a lot more of what we call protocols. There's a lot more of this kind of internal contract, which is exposed to the designer, the engineer that's using Rive, to understand what in Rive. So for now, these are only runtime things. Later, there will be edit time features that can be extended too. So tooling and things that you could build yourself, custom assets and all that kind of stuff. But right now, you have the ability to make a procedural path if you want to. So we have a protocol that lets you say, okay, just fill this path with some data, some points, for example. And today in Rive, you get stars, you get circles, you get squares with rounded rectangles, with rounded corners. Well, you can make one that's your own thing, that's completely custom to your project, and it's just parametric. You put in the parameters, and you can animate those parameters, and it spits out the correct vertices. And that's something that you've extended and built into Rive, and that's a protocol.
Sorry to interrupt, but just real quick for like the motion audience to think about is like, how in Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, they had kind of like this outline style that felt very drawn and like kind of comic booky, like it was kind of sketchy, the edges of the characters and all that, and they'd animate a little bit. So you can do that now. You can tell your stroke along your path that you have in Rive. You can tell it, hey, I don't want it to be like just a standard stroke. I want it to be controlled by this new type of path effect, which I coded. I wrote a little script for it. And that can be like, what Luigi's talking about. Like it can create like this kind of sketchy style that is segmented and randomized, and not only that, but the script exposes values, which I'm going to say the wrong words, which what are they? They're parameters, but they're available properties. They're available in the inspector. When you select that path effect, you'll see those values that the script exposes that you can key and animate on the timeline. So the designer can literally animate the properties of the script, so you can animate like how sketchy it looks or how jagged it is and all that. And yeah, that's
that's
one
very
example of
cool.
what we just described.
Yeah, so there's path protocol, there's path effect protocol, there's a layout. You can make a custom layout. You'll see demos of that. But basically, what the big takeaway from it is, I think, is that they are little morsels of data, of logic that can be applied to fit inside of Rive's ecosystem. You are literally extending Rive. And Flash did this a bit with a movie clip. If you remember, you could write the backing action script to a movie clip. Um, we do have things like that. There's a very similar concept with layouts that you can do where, but it's much more throughout the whole process. You will have scripts that are driving an animation, that are driving an effect somewhere, that are driving just a conversion of data for something, and then there will be scripts that are creating and driving a bigger experience. And it's much less of, in Flash, it was much more of like, here's all my code, here's the chunk of code, and this is more like, here's a lot of little pieces of code that work together to create experience, and you can still do write the whole thing, and here's a big chunk of code. But where we think people will be most successful with is compartmentalizing, because when you compartmentalize like that, you can also reuse all those things across any other project. They can become your tool set, your arsenal, that lets you use Rive your way.
Is there in your mind, I think this is kind of a silly question based on some of the things you guys have said, but is there a ceiling for scripting? I mean, even before scripting came out, we were, judging that Contra contest that Rive was a part of, and there were artists building full-blown interactive games with like an AI computer player.
We're doing more of those, by the way.
Yeah, absolutely incredible. And I don't think that the person who did that actually used scripting. I don't think it was out yet.
There were a few people that used it in early access. There were some entries, but not that. You're right. None of the winners did, I think. Yeah.
I don't think he used it. Yeah, and which is even more mind blowing. And so I think that the obvious use case, especially for motion designers, a lot of them are kind of gamers because they're into that aesthetic anyway. I mean, can you just will there be games on the Steam store one day that are just you build them in Rive? It almost can replace Unity for 2D games. Is that kind of where the ceiling is, or is it lower or higher in your mind? We interrupt this podcast briefly to tell you about our All Access program, the number one way on the internet to learn the toolbox of motion design. For one price, you get access to every single course we're making, including all upcoming courses, as long as your subscription is active. You get unlimited critique from a professional motion designer on 100% of the projects you upload, access to our 24/7 community, which hosts monthly live portfolio reviews and live guest workshops on all kinds of awesome topics. If you complete a project-based course, you also get a verified credential that you can show off. Join over 3,000 artists from all over the world who are dedicated to improving their careers and their skill set. All the details are on our site. Check the link in the description. We hope to see you in class.
Absolutely. That's where we're
And
headed.
it'll go further than that too. Yeah.
I think that's one of the biggest negatives about Flash going away. Like losing Flash, we lost this ability to create these creative experiences that were a blend of all these things. And don't get me wrong, Flash had problems, had performance issues. We're in a very different level of performance than Flash was, but this ability to sort of create these experiences that were just really really different, websites, for an artist, for a new album, for a new movie that like kind of doesn't fit the typical scrolling SaaS sort of software page. Those disappeared, and also like games that people were making with Flash. That is very much the vision. Actually, when Luigi and I were first walking back in, I forget when it was, maybe 2017, 2016, to get a coffee together here in Palo Alto, and we were talking through this whole idea. That was the initial idea we talked about, was the editor in Rive is where you're going to build a full-blown game. We had done a little bit of HTML5 experiments with a little gaming studio that we had run before, where we had built some games that were just sort of for fun and never really made any money, but made us excited about like, wow, there's so much that we can do in the web as like an editor. Um, and so that was really the vision, was like, hey, we're going to let you build the entire experience, entire game, and then ship it directly to the iOS App Store, Google Play, Steam, and all of that. And yeah, that is absolutely the vision. But again, going back to what I said before, the runtime is so lightweight that even as we add these new things, like I think scripting adds like 230 kilobytes. I don't think there is a comparable tool that has all the features that Rive does and such high performance and light impact on size and memory. You literally can use it to just build mini games within a bigger game, or just a UI of your AAA game, like we were talking about, which we have companies doing. Or you can build an entire game with it, and yeah, that's what's really exciting about it, because of the creativity that it gives you as that sort of multiple persona that we were talking about, designer, engineer, animator, all working together
Yeah. I
to
mean, I
build a
think
creative
it's kind of
experience.
already been proven that you can make a full game in Rive, and scripting obviously just adds a ton of capability. And, every time you guys launch a new feature, I immediately think like, oh, I can see like, here's a crazy thing you could do with it. I love the idea of being able to bring in external data from APIs and stuff. And I assume test that in the editor while you're building.
Yeah, that'll mean that you can literally just ship the package
Yeah.
from the editor and not have to do any of that stuff at runtime. Because today you still have to.
But also, like you're saying, you can see it at edit time with real data, and that's
Yeah,
something that's also
yeah.
never
You
really been done.
you can play level 1 or play level 100, and all of that is dynamically.
Yeah, but also imagine you're building the AP news app or something, and you want to build a news reader or something. You could see it with real headlines and stories and images from the actual feeds directly in your editor as you're building it out, and you realize, oh, you know what, this doesn't work. Oh, we localized it to German. This word doesn't work here. We need to add some extra UX or change the UX for this language because it just doesn't look right, and you'll find that out.
Yeah. I don't think that any motion designer that hasn't worked on an app or any kind of interactive thing before, I don't think you can really overstate how important that is. When you're building something interactive, the edge cases are what always gets you. And, I'm assuming even things like, oh, the API interrupted and we need an error state, I guess. I didn't think of that, but now it just happened. And so I'll just build one real quick. And those things, I mean, even the simplest website, like, it takes a million years just because of all those little things.
Well, and imagine doing that with an inventory system that has tables of data.
Yeah.
It just gets crazy complicated. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, okay, so let's get into some crazy complicated stuff. And I know that there's a limit to what you can actually say about this, so we can sort of talk theoretically if you want. But I was blown away by the Spotify Wrapped this year. Again, I look forward to it every year. I always want to know what bands I listen to and stuff. And I saw it before I knew that Rive was used on it. And I thought, I wonder if this was Rive. And then I think it was like a couple days later, they confirmed, or you guys talked about it. Somebody talked about it, so it was confirmed. Okay, that was Rive. And so all of the animation, right? And if someone hasn't seen it, you can probably find it on social media. People have screen capped it, and you can see what it looks like. But beautiful design, beautiful animation. And what's so cool is everything just totally reacts to what bands you listen to. And there's kind of this story that it tells as you're going through the different screens, and it'll interrupt you to show a video and then go back to it. And I'm just trying to figure out, like, there's so much complexity to that, right? I mean, you're talking about like somewhere there's a data warehouse with every song I listen to for how long in 2025. And then that's getting processed through some algorithm to like pick my top, like, so just overall, we don't have to focus on that specific thing, but how does something like that work? And maybe specifically, like, as motion designers, like, where do we fit in to something like that? Because that's got to just be, I mean, even though Rive simplifies the hell out of it, it's still a massive, just even logic to kind of figure out how it all works together. So I'm just curious if maybe you can talk us through that.
Yeah, I don't actually. So we worked very closely with the Spotify team. I can definitely say that. I don't know how much more I can share. We started working with them early in the year as they were, evaluating to do this. And I can tell you that there definitely were a lot of motion designers involved with it. There were also a lot of engineers and a lot of their designers. They did bring in some external folks, which they tweeted about publicly, and shared that some experts on Rive to just help them basically get started and move
Mhm.
faster, and also just have like the motion chops that they wanted for this type of thing. Because I think yeah. Uh, so but really the answer to your question is the fact that Rive lets you connect animations to data. That's really what enabled them to do this. So a lot of that stuff still is keyframed, but it's driven by data. So like how far one piece is, or another part of that is, or the image for the that even without data binding you could do that, right? The sort of that kind of like
Mhm.
the like trail of circles with like the avatar in
Yeah,
the
yeah.
front of the artist. I don't know if you remember that kind of race. That was like the big kind of reveal at the end of the wrapped experience. um, that is literally just like a circle in Rive with an image clipped to it, and that image, the runtime has the ability to swap it out with any image that you want. So they didn't have to go and animate like a different version that had every single different artist doing that. They just swapped out that image as one animation doing it. But then, how many of those pop up, how their positions and all of that, that's all driven by data and can control like how far it is and all that. So I mean that's the, and I don't know specific. I actually haven't looked at that file. I know our team did help them with some of that stuff, but I personally haven't seen how it's actually all set up. But that's like a core benefit of Rive, is that you can do stuff like that. You can animate a trail of circles and give it like the motion and the timing and that kind of eye of a designer. And what they did really well, by the way, I noticed, and I saw LinkedIn did this a bit too with their one. Again, I don't know this for a fact, but just having seen how it played back, they used a mixture of our like super smooth playback at 120 whatever synced with your resolution, like basically uncapped frame rate, and then
Mhm.
mixing in animations that have like a quantize effect where it's like going at 15 frames per second or something like that. And I think the point is you get all that control on the animation side to make those decisions, but then it's still all driven by data.
Well, that's the thing that I think is the point, though, that you broke down a complicated experience into what, and the designer, the animators, the motion designers were able to do that. They broke down what was in their interest, right? Like we need to know the images, we need to know how far ahead, how many of them, and we want to lay them out like this, and then we'll use this feature to do this and that. And so they got to define, okay, engineering, this is the data we need. This is what's going to make this experience work the way we want it. And we've mocked it up and we've got the data actually here in the editor and you can see what it works like. Now just go fill it with something that'll work. And then the engineering will come back and say, oh, but we actually get changes throughout the year in this data. So how can we make it respond as the year moves on? And then they'll go back and forth on that. And because you've got this tooling that lets you do that, lets you iterate on it and change the data, change the design while you're working on the same thing, you have the ability to do that. And that's why they were able to do it in a relatively short amount of time. It was a huge undertaking. I know it took them a very long time to build that properly. But yes, there were all the other aspects of it too, the data warehouses, the AI that analyzed the data and all that stuff. But that was compartmentalized and separated. Those were the business rules, and Rive gave you the views and the view models that were filled with the data from those business rules and made it function in a relatively seamless and relatively simple compared to the whole. Yes, if you look at the whole thing altogether, it's this monster problem, but instead they had the right people working on the right morsels.
So one thing to add is I think that like we use words, all these words, and it sounds complicated. I can kind of put myself in the shoes of like a motion designer hearing this and thinking like, well, this still sounds really complicated to me. I don't get like how I would get from like my initial vision to that. And one quick way, if I can just like try to illustrate it, is you have like the that those like three sort of snakes of like of circles that are coming down the screen, and like you could build that animation first as like a single timeline and be like, okay, this is what I really want it to look like, this is what I want to do. And you sort of understand like, okay, what's going on is like I've got this one animation that's kind of doing its thing, it's looping and it's got the circles kind of maybe randomizing a little bit and doing that, and then really it's like the Y position that's changing, and I want it to have a specific type of easing and all of that as it moves forward and comes back. And once you've broken them down and that you understand how that works, you just go to the you make a component for that one part. You're like, okay, I'm not going to have like three or two of these. I'm not going to hard code that in. I'm just going to say we can dynamically spawn multiple of these. So I'm going to create one component of that. Just how you think about it. Components are things that I want to like have multiple of. I might have one or I might have 100 of them, and I need to be able to dynamically control that. So I'm going to make this into a component. And then I'm going to right click on its Y property over here, that where it moves. And I'm going to say, I want to make a data property for this in my view model. And now that data property, I can see as I move it, it's going to move that, that thing up and down and change the positioning in the race. And so that's sort of like what I tell my engineering team, like, hey, you go and modify that. You connect that to data and you make it move up and down and that'll control it. But then you realize like, oh, it's not, it's kind of linear. I don't want it to just skip, or maybe the data comes in like where it goes to 0 to 100 and it just skips down there. And I want it to be smooth. And that's where you add what we were just talking about, which is converters to that data. So you tell it, I want it to interpolate. When 0 comes in and 100 comes in, I don't want it to jump from 0 to 100. I want it to interpolate from 0 to 100. And I need it to have like a certain type of timing, a certain type of easing. And all of that are properties that go into the interpolator, the converter, sorry. The interpolator is a type of converter. It's called interpolator converter. And you can have multiple of them on top of it. Say, for example, I don't know, you also want to display that number somewhere on the screen and you don't want it to have decimals. You can add another converter to say like format it this way for where it gets used over here. And so on the position, no, keep the decimals because I want it to be smooth, but where it gets displayed, use this converter. So anyway, hopefully that helps you kind of think through that. Like, it's not as scary as it sounds. It's literally taking like a property that you're animating and you're keying anyway. And you're saying like, oh, I want this to be available to the data so that either my script or my engineers at runtime can connect to it. And that's it. That's what we're talking about when we say data. And it can be a number like property, scale or position, Y, X, or it can be, text, like a string, or it can be a list of objects, a list of components. Like how many of these components do I want in here? 1 or 2 or 3, and how should they space out? What layout rules should they follow? All of that can be part of the data that's abstracted. Is a column or a row that can be a data that drives that point too. Okay, that's probably went a little too far, but maybe it helps.
All right, well, Luigi had to jump off, but I want to keep going with you, Guido, because I actually think that was a really good explanation. And I guess what I was initially thinking was maybe a way to put it is first of all, you keep using this term creative technologist, and I've heard Sarah from your team use that term too, and it's sort of almost, to me, just sounds like a unicorn. It's someone that's like got a good eye and they can design, animate a little bit, but they also understand enough about development and the tech world to be dangerous, and that's really kind of like the ideal base for a Rive artist, I feel like. But so there's like another layer on top of that. And, like in the motion design world, maybe it's like the producer, the creative director that has the idea for the thing that you come in and help execute. And at the level of something like a Spotify Wrapped, I'm just trying to figure out who that person is. Like who's actually coming up with these ideas? We should do this. We have all this data about every song someone listened to. We have an AI that can like create these cool lists and custom text strings to send to them. And we have all this imagery, and half the artists give us videos that we can send to people. And we can tie all that together with something cool looking, and they haven't yet used the word Rive or animation. Like how do these giant projects like this tend to come around in the first place?
Yeah, that at Spotify specifically, I don't know. I don't know how that happened. I mean, I'm sure they have exactly what you're describing over there. But yeah, I mean, in the past, when we used to work as our design dev agency and people would come to us, it was stakeholders at the company that would do this. And I think sometimes it's about bringing in external people. So I know that Spotify did bring in some external folks that had Rive experience, but also pretty big names in the industry that have that creative direction experience. And so it could be that it came from them. I'm actually not sure. But I mean, I've seen this in the past in our career, is that people can do it both ways, right? They either have an in-house creative direction branding team, or they bring in an external studio to kind of set that tone for that specific project. So yeah, unfortunately, I don't know exactly how this happened at Spotify. We were a lot more sort of involved at the beginning of the project in sort of demonstrating some of the stuff that we talked about regarding, performance and size and that stuff that they were very sensitive to, because it is, something that goes out to millions of people. I think 5 million people, 6 million, I don't know how many people, or maybe more, 500 million. I'm not sure what it is. And you think about that, like there's other complications involved with that, right? Like how do you make sure that everyone actually has updated their app in time to get it on the right date? And so that meant that it had to go out much earlier than the date that it went live, because we wanted to make sure that people actually had it on their phone already and running, and actually maybe running a couple tests in the background to make sure that there weren't any
Yeah.
edge case devices that were going to crash something. So there's just, yeah, a lot that goes into that. But anyway, we're going off topic from your original question, which I unfortunately just don't know how that happened there. I don't know if I'd be allowed to share it if I did know, but I genuinely don't know.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, this is kind of the brave new world, I think, for a lot of the listeners of this podcast and our audience. And I'm trying to like wrap my head around it as much as I can, because I feel like I've always had one foot in both worlds, like, in this sort of tech software startup world, and then the motion design world where I've spent most of my career. And Rive really just kind of, just does this with both those worlds. And I think people have to kind of start to train themselves to think a little bit differently than like the studio mindset.
Yeah, but I also do think that, going back to the creative technologies, which by the way it might sound scary, but like what we just described earlier, where like you're a designer, you don't even have to be a motion designer, but you already know a little bit of design, and you know how to like manipulate a property, and you take that action that I talked about like right click and put this in a view model and help me expose it. You just became a creative technologist. You just learned something that you didn't know before. And that's all it takes to like become a creative technologist. Start playing with that and understanding how those things work. And so I would say that majority of people who are now creative technologists at Rive were not creative technologists when they started out. I mean, maybe some Flash people and some folks who had kind of done both of those things. But I think that what we're seeing, going back to your question about the creative director and all that, we are seeing at a bunch of companies that those are the folks who are coming up with these ideas and saying like, well, what if we did this? And then it gets visibility in the company, and it quickly becomes like, wow, let's go and actually build this. That happened at another big year-end project, which I don't think I can share the specifics of, but it came from that. It came from like a very small self-serve group of champions that came in and tried out Rive and were like, well, this is cool. Let's contact their team and see if we can run a pilot with them. And we did this pilot, and like about a week into the pilot, they were like, we need to show this to our CEO. And the CEO greenlit it, and they shipped their end of year thing in a matter of like, I think it was like a month and a half from that moment.
That's crazy.
So that example is like where you as an individual can get such like visibility but the ability to push these kind of new experiences just by trying out a new tool and being open to it and experimenting with it. And I mean, I think that's a lot of what we've been seeing with AI too. This isn't a story that's unique to Rive. I think it's happening across a lot of companies that suddenly like the individual can do so much more. And I think that's a huge opportunity that you as a motion designer have the skills to differentiate yourself in a way that no one else can, because now everybody can build a quick experience. You can not only build a quick experience, you can make it look amazing and animate and do things that others are at a disadvantage of because they don't have those skills.
Yeah. For our end of the year podcast, we had one of our guests was John Lepore, and that's kind of like what he does. He knows a lot about everything. Yeah. I'm sure you guys are familiar. And that's basically what he was saying in the podcast. Was that's basically been his MO for the past several years, is just looking around and seeing like all these cool things that he understands, but most people maybe understand one or two, and he makes it his job to understand 30. And then he can piece together these crazy ideas. He did this crazy thing. I don't know if you saw it. He did this amazing thing with Shopify for their, I think it was like their Black Friday thing, where it's crazy. We'll link to it in the show notes for this, but it was live. It was live action with like stuff on it. It was crazy.
That might have had Rive stuff in it because they're a big customer, and all their sort of big quarterly stuff that they do, or twice a year stuff that they do, like the winter's edition, the summer, all that stuff tends to have a lot of Rive stuff in it. So I'm a big customer, and all their sort of big quarterly stuff that they do, or twice a year stuff that they do, like the winter's edition, the summer, all that stuff tends to have a lot of Rive stuff in it. So I'm curious.
It would make a lot of sense. I mean, that would be the perfect tool, because it was live action, like a feed but then there was like graphics over it that were obviously live updated. I think that's a perfect example though of like, there's not very many people on Earth, right? Like, there's probably not like thousands of them that have all the knowledge to come up with that idea. But motion
Yeah.
designers are in this unique position, especially the more technical ones that can kind of wrap their heads around the tech side, the development side a little bit. All of a sudden, you'll see opportunities out there that I don't think most people see yet. That's changing, obviously.
Yeah.
In 10 years, maybe a lot of people are seeing it. But right now, it's like to just think to do that is enough, to kind of get on someone's radar.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I think that, I keep bringing up Flash, but I do think that that was what made the Flash experience so unique, is that like the motion designer seeing the opportunity that like, we don't need to just make things appear on screen. We can make them like transition and smoothly appear and then disappear when they go away. And it's like that putting that all together in a way that a motion designer can is a superpower that
Yeah.
just adds to the experience in a way that I don't think, I don't think others can.
Yeah. All right. So let's talk about the future of Rive. We'll start landing the plane here. So I know you've probably got a whole bunch of things you want to tease and things you can't say, but I'd be remiss if I didn't ask this, because this is the thing I get asked the most. Is there any thought of implementing some form of 3D into Rive at any point?
Oh, it's such a bummer that Luigi left, because yes, he's very opinionated on this. He has really cool thoughts on it. But he basically, I hope I'm going to say this right, but he's basically taking 3D models and loading them with our script and then projecting them to 2D positions on the screen. So it's actually still rendering everything in 2D, but it looks fully 3D, and they're like full 3D models. And it's using like our shapes. It's not currently doing anything with textures. It can do that too, but he's just doing it with shapes, with fills and that type of stuff. But it looks like full blown 3D. And you can expose, like I was saying, those scripting properties where you can rotate it and roll it and translate it and all that. And so that is already possible today. Like I said, I'll send you that stuff, and he's got scripts that do that stuff. And he's just got an OBJ loader basically. But as far as like full blown 3D, yes, that is also, it has always been on the roadmap. The renderer supports it. The editor is, there's nothing preventing us from doing it. It's just what we talk about all the time, which our team is sick of us hearing, is a quote from Steve Jobs, which is, we need to say no to a million things so that we can say yes to just a few things. And that's been one of the things that we've just consistently said. It's super important. It doesn't mean it's not important, but we have to say no to it right now because we want to get to that full V1 feature set that lets you build a full experience. But yeah, Rive is totally primed to do all of that. And I hope we'll be able to share a lot more. If Luigi were here, he could tease a lot more of the technical details, because he's got some really smart ideas on how to do it really performantly in typical Rive fashion, in a way that's not going to add a lot of bloat, a lot of shaders, a lot of just performance and weight considerations. He has some really novel ideas there that I think we'll be excited to share, but I need him to do it because I can't do it justice.
Yeah, I don't know if you'll know the answer to this, but I know that, one of the things that that we talked about, I think the first time you came on the podcast, was that, one of the big kind of reasons that Rive is being used so much now for real-time stuff is because you guys have built this renderer, this 2D renderer that is like crazy performant and can do things that typically are not performant, like, rendering type really crisply, and now and
animating it,
blurring things. You created this whole new thing. I think you guys probably have a patent. Oh no, it's open source, right? So you don't.
We did patent it, but we also open sourced.
You open sourced it, yeah. So vector feathering, owned by Rive. Is there a similar technical hurdle that needs to be overcome for 3D, or does that technology exist already?
Yeah, this is where I need Luigi, because he I don't know if his idea is something that he's just like iterating on someone else's idea, or if it's genuinely something novel that he's come up with. But he's talked about it with the team, and there's a very performant way to do it. Because one of the things that's really challenging to Rive is that we can't just like give you like some feature that exists in WebGL, or some on that point, because we need to, like, people ask us, like, why haven't you added all the WebGL shaders to do all this cool stuff on the web? And that's because Rive doesn't just run on the web. People like look at Spotify. Spotify runs on iOS and Android natively, and then it needs to run in game engines really performantly, and it needs to run in vehicles and all that. So we have to do things in a way that is a little different, but then gives you the benefit of being not only multi-platform but really performant across all of those. He has a very specific way to do it that I don't fully understand. But he's mentioned overcomes those hurdles in a way that it'll work everywhere. It'll work on all platforms. And there's a similar plan for video, by the way. I can tease that too.
Oh, that's
So
awesome.
video
That's
will work
excellent.
natively in Rive. Yeah.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah.
Oh,
Without us having to bring necessarily a bunch of decoders and things that you already have that like doesn't make sense. Like, right. Like most people have a H.264 decoder. We don't need to bring that. And he has ideas on how to do that really well.
That's very cool. Okay, cool. I've got one more specific question, then you can tease whatever else you want if there's more to tease. So with scripting, and this is something that I think you've kind of hinted at stuff like this in the past, but with scripting now, it feels like, well, like Luigi and you've both basically described what I would call plugins that you can now just make as little scripts, and they have controls and they can manipulate things. And so is the idea now that because you have scripting and it's so powerful, it would be really cool if someone created a cool script that was essentially rough and edges from After Effects, and I could just bring that in and I'd pay $15 for that, whatever. Is there any movement in that direction? Is that part of the vision to have like a really vibrant ecosystem of tools that are built?
Yes, that is exactly it, and that's what the remix functionality. That's why we built the very first. Like our marketplace is very. Feel free to tell us all. Like it's not even the marketplace isn't even an MVP today. It's literally like a bunch of tiles of things that people have posted and shared, and a remix button. But that's why we built it, because it's a framework. It's a groundwork for all of that. It's the ability to, today you can post something that you've built in the Rive editor, post it to our marketplace, and someone can find it and remix it. They hit a button, remix, and it shows up in their workspace. And they can then reuse that across. They can turn it into a library and then share it and reuse it across multiple projects. So that is exactly the beginning of what you're describing. What will happen is that you'll be able to publish something to our marketplace, but say, don't make this free, make this paid. And then instead of a remix button, it's going to be a buy this. And once you buy it, it turns into a remix button, and you can now remix it to your workspace. Or it'll be available. And we haven't figured out the entire UX there, but that'll be essentially the way that it works. Another thing that is part of all that is I mentioned libraries. Obviously, you can guess that that's where we're headed. Also, not just like the ability to, sell assets and scripts, but also libraries of stuff. A library of I don't know, UI, to build
like
Farmville,
a UI kit,
or
basically.
a UI, whatever. So all of that is a not so secret open secret, like a marketplace. That's where it's headed. I think what you're describing is dead on. Like we totally expect people to do that with scripting, and I think it might even happen sooner. People might just like export their Rive file and put it on an existing marketplace and say like, hey, this is available. Like we've seen people do this with like Gumroad and other tools, and I wouldn't be surprised at all if some other scripting places just start offering that.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I've seen. I mean, there was rivefiles.com, which I don't know if that ever went anywhere. Like there's. I think people understand that the first mover to this is going to have a big advantage when Rive fully blasts off. I'm thinking of sites like, Motion Array and companies like that got in early on the templates and the packs and stuff like that.
AE scripts and all of those.
Yeah, exactly. So there will be a Rive version.
We're totally supportive of that. Like I think that's part of a healthy ecosystem. I think we just believe we need to have ours too, because it has to tie into all that stuff we talked about with like, having a library that's tied to the creator's account that then can update that library. And it tells you like, oh, the library was updated. Do you want to take that update and pull it into your project? There's just a lot of stuff like that it has to natively work with our marketplace.
Yeah. Are there any other things? I mean, like I think the scripting /plugin /library thing, I mean, that can kind of cover a lot. Physics simulators and maybe 3D renderers like Luigi's making using the scripting tool, I guess. Are there other things that you're really excited about?
Render actually, I think it uses the same renderer. There's no difference.
Well, he basically built a 3D renderer. You said he's projecting the 3D geometry onto it too. I mean, he built a renderer. I think is the way to do it.
Yeah. You should go check. I'll share that with you.
Yeah, that's really nerdy and cool. I like that.
Yeah. And anyone can use that script, so he'll probably make that available. Like it will be like an OBJ loader that you can use to load that into your phone. Yeah, sorry, your question was anything else?
Yeah, is there anything else you're really excited about that, coming out in reasonable time? Yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest ones that is like maybe not exciting but really important that is coming that we obviously have had on the V1 list forever and has always been part of the plan, but like has been kind of like a bit put off until some of these first features came first is the accessibility portion. So today you can make Rive stuff accessible on the web. You can data binding and iOS, Android too. There's like data binding allows you to expose all that and connect it to the native accessibility features on those platforms, but it's really tedious. There's a lot of work you have to do with that. So we are working on, we will be working on as soon as we hit some of these other V1 things that we're done with, a way for you in the editor to basically directly say, this is a headline, this is a text bar, this affordance is a button, this is like, just basically give semantic meaning to things. And then the runtime will automatically handle that for you. Basically on the web, on iOS, on Android, on different systems, it'll mean that you don't have to do that work. It'll be automatically connected to that, which means that like if you want to build a full website in Rive, it'll be crawlable by search engines or AI, basically any kind of bot that wants to crawl your site and read it. And screen readers too. Like you'll be able. So that's one of the things that like is like I was getting at, like things that we're still building for V1. There's things like keyboard input and focus management, which is coming that we're working on. Those are all things that are sort of table stakes for being able to sort of tab through and control the focus on specific things so that you can have a screen reader read it back to you and tell you what it is. But so that's kind of like, yeah, that's really kind of the, I think, biggest missing piece to that V1 vision, building a full experience, is that, yeah, all of it needs to be accessible. And so that's sort of a big thing that we're going to be doing. And it's something that we just initially chose. Like, it was one of those things we recognize it's really important, but we got to say no to it right now because there's no point in us making all this stuff accessible, but nobody wants to use it. If we'd started off by making state machines and animations really accessible, but there's no text, there's no dynamic text, there's no data bind, there's no like, why do I care that it's accessible? And so that was sort of like the kind of difficult decision we had to make, was that like, no, let's make the platform really appealing and able to build something amazing with it, and then let's make sure that it's accessible. And yeah, that's what's coming.
I think that's smart. I mean, it's one of those things where like, and I think a lot of motion designers won't even really be familiar with like the concept of accessibility. I mean, like I think we know what the word is, but in especially the web space, there's like a real like technical kind of meaning to that. But I mean, I think again, it's like one of those things where there has to be a critical mass of adoption before a lot of the really cool stuff starts to happen. That seems like one of those features where like, okay, that kind of cracks open like another wide swath of the market too. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. It suddenly becomes like, I would say today that's the biggest reason not to build an entire website in Rive, is that it's not going to be easy to make it discoverable. You're going to have to do either the data binding thing I was talking about, where you connect everything and build up a DOM of all this stuff that's available and legible, or wait until we support it natively and you don't have to worry about it.
Make it a lot easier. All right, cool. So last question, and we've touched on this a little bit, but at the like in the middle of my 11-hour end of the year podcast that we did, I was trying to give motion designers, especially I think ones that have been in the industry for a little while, try to give them some advice, because like the world that we came into, I kind of started my career like early 2000s, right? So Flash was still a thing, MoGraph.net, Too Advanced was still like around and doing stuff. And now it's so different. Everything's so spread out. And so I've actually I'm trying to consciously do this. I keep messing up, but like, instead of saying motion designer, right, as though that's a title that you have, motion design is like this tool set that you have, and you can bring that over to Duolingo or Spotify or, any other million companies, or you can bring it over to Buck or to, or John Laporte can hire you. And so it's kind of like a different way of looking at it. And specifically with Rive, I feel like there's so many opportunities out there for people who have that toolbox and they just add the Rive tool into it because they already have design, animation, After Effects. So
none of that stuff is unique to Rive.
Yeah. I mean, I always tell people, if you know After Effects, you are halfway there. Like you already kind of know Rive even without knowing it. So I'm curious, like from your perspective,
you have the taste portion, by the way, too. Like that thing that I've been talking about with AI. Now the floor is like everyone can build this stuff. The taste is what makes you different. Like you have that above a lot of people because you've been honing it and refining it with animation and timing and understanding
That's
that.
so true.
Sorry,
So I'm curious from your perspective, because you see how Rive is used across like a lot of different industries. What, if some junior artist came to you or someone who's been in the industry and they're like, look, I'm a great animator, I know how to design, I learned Rive, I took School Motion's course, so now I know it really well. Where are the opportunities? There's the obvious places, right? Okay, maybe Spotify's hiring, I don't know. But there's probably a lot of non-obvious ones. So I was going to ask you, where do you see, where's a lane people can look for?
Okay, so I'm just gonna like self-plug here our like social post that we do
Yeah.
once a week. We do a post where we have a team and some scripts that they built, like they're just basically scraping everything, trying to find like where Rive
Yep.
gets mentioned in any sort of job posting, and then we do like a big recap. I think it's weekly across our social media. So definitely follow Rive on those accounts and across different. I think we post it everywhere: LinkedIn, Twitter, all of them, and the threads. There's so many now, and we just do a big sort of summary of all of the things that are currently hiring. So that's definitely check that out. But then I would say in on top of that, we're obviously looking for Rive there, but anything that has a product and motion in the job description is something where you should be applying. You should be looking at that. Don't miss out Contra. Contra has their experts program for Rive, and I know like where we did the challenge, there's a lot of jobs posted there all the time. Yeah, those are the first ones that come to mind. But in general, I think that like also just like building stuff and putting it out there is one of the main ways that people end up finding Rive designers. In some ways, because we find them like that, and we send them to like some of our enterprise customers and tell them like, hey, check this guy. Like someone recently did like a roulette style thing. I don't know if you saw it. That's like all data bound and like actually tilts it like in 3D.
I did see it. Yeah.
And you can imagine that there's a bunch of like customers that we have that work in that space, because that motion and is very like appealing for that audience. And we sent that over to a bunch of customers and said like, hey, this is a great example of like the type of skill you should be looking for. So I think just like what we were getting at before, being the type of person who just puts that work out there and kind of sees trends and things happening before, and you realize, oh, I can put this together and just build something unique. I mean, I would say that's how Luigi and I started in the first place, was just building a ton of stuff and putting it out there. That even if it doesn't immediately land you a job, it pays dividends, and it's I think one of the best ways to learn and just get out there and make yourself known.
Slot machine companies, that's where the opportunity.
Yeah. I mean, I think that was one example. Yeah,
I honestly never thought of that.
You can imagine it, right?
Yeah.
There's so many things. There's a lot of motion there, but yeah, I'm trying to think of like other examples. I mean, vehicles I think are like starting to adopt Rive and understand that. In fact, there's something at CES right now that I hope has. I don't know if they've actually revealed it yet or not, but there's a vehicle that's using Rive for their UI,
cool.
And they're showing it off there. So yeah, anyway, I guess I'm getting into like, I think motion is getting into all kinds of things, and everyone is sort of starting to recognize that. So it's really less about where it is today, but where I think more like everything is going to happen. This is going to be like the kind of the taste that we're talking about, that the apps that stand out and really care about experience are going to be betting on. And you saw that with Spotify and LinkedIn and Duolingo last year.
Thank you so much for checking out this episode. Make sure you are subscribed so you don't miss any of the amazing upcoming guests we have on the School Motion podcast, or any of the other awesome content we have. Everything we talked about will be in the show notes, and I hope to see you next time.